Guys, this is super deep, super nuts, super technical, and the only way you're going to be able to wrap your head around it is if I tell it to you backwards. Just kidding. I mean, I do have to tell it to you backwards, but not that style of backwards. Remember when Trooper Paul testified and he showed us this chart and this chart and we were all like, wait a minute, where's the time column? How do we know what time this actually happened? And then Trooper Paul came back with some likely story like he didn't need the time, he just needed the key cycle and something about kilometres. Well, guess what? There is actually a device on the Toyota Lexus that has a date column with the key cycle. And here it is right here. This is a Toyota Highlander. And the software that's being used here is called Toyota TechStream. You might be familiar with the word TechStream.
Toyota TechStream. The TechStream was the TechStream. The TechStream at that point. TechStream.
And which part of the TechStream were you purportedly showing us, Trooper Paul?
Vehicle control history in it.
Sorry, I missed that. Called what?
A vehicle control history.
Thank you.
Well, that's exactly what we're looking at right here. The vehicle control history. So where's the date column, Trooper Paul? None of the data that you showed us had a date. And don't come at me with that we didn't have access to that version of the software, because the version of the software that we're looking at right here is well over a year old now. And when were you using the software?
For this one, I believe it was February 2nd, 2023.
In fact, isn't it true, Trooper Paul, that Toyota has always had a date column since at least 2014? And isn't it true, Trooper Paul, that the only way you'd be missing a date column is if you didn't use the TechStream software? And isn't it true, Trooper Paul, that the only way you'd be missing a date column is if you use the OBD2 port, which connects to a completely different chip that does not store the timestamp? Let me introduce you to an actual TechStream engineer, Trooper Paul.
All right, well, David, thank you for joining us here. Really appreciate you taking the time to come and meet with us today and help talk about Toyota TechStream. And for our viewers that may not have even heard of TechStream or know very little about it, why don't you start off, what is TechStream?
TechStream is Toyota's software that they use to diagnose their cars in the dealerships, right? And so it's what they use to do all of their background work. And so it's for repair. It's a software that's designed for vehicle repair, so that they can look at codes, they can look at troubleshooting, they can look at all the systems on the vehicle through the DLC, the same DLC that we use.
Okay, and so this was developed primarily for the automotive service industry, right? The repair industry. That's what it was developed for. Is that the primary industry that uses TechStream?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically Toyota's software. So the dealerships use the software, but they also allow you to purchase a license to use it. I mean, for aftermarket shops or whoever wants to, or us. But yeah, basically, it's a software designed to help with vehicle repair.
Okay, but there are systems that you can access using TechStream that are beneficial to what we do, traffic accident investigation and reconstruction. What systems are out there that TechStream can access that maybe otherwise you couldn't get to?
Well, the big one for us is vehicle control history, which is basically there's a lot of different information that is stored from various triggers that Toyota stores in the airbag control module. So that data is collected in the background and stored, but there's a wide variety of things that we're going to get into today as far as triggers and different things that can actually cause that data to be stored. So it's useful because you'll get things like throttle opening, vehicle speed, cruise control on or off, brake application, a lot of what we get in EDR plus a lot of additional information.
Let me repeat that for you. He said a lot of what we get from EDR plus a whole lot of other information. And EDR stands for Event Data Recorder. That's the whole other chip I referred to that is accessed through the OBD2 port. This will become significant later.
But you can get it not only the 5 seconds near the crash, but way prior to the crash, or even days and weeks prior to that. So one of the examples we'll look at today, it's a 2015 that I imaged on the 28th of October of 2022 that has events all the way back to 2014.
Interesting, right? He took a 2020 model vehicle, created an image of the data, and it dated back to 2014. Where's the timestamp, Trooper Paul?
Okay. What about video images? I've heard possibly, does TechStream video or images or pictures, anything like that? What are you aware of with TechStream's ability to access video images?
You actually can, in some very late model vehicles, get video images as well. That is documented in the Toyota Information System, which is basically their electronic database that tells you what's where in the car, and it tells you what cars record what. And so there are some images that can be downloaded as well using the TechStream software.
Only some very late model vehicles can capture images. Considering this was in 2023 and Karen's vehicle was 2021, it probably wasn't one of those vehicles. Which is a very different story to somebody deleted it.
Oh, interesting. What about support or coverage? What models are supported using TechStream, or at least with the data that we're going to use or would be useful to us? How far back does the coverage go? And is it all Toyota vehicles?
The vehicle control history, which is specifically what I'm using the TechStream information, and what most people that do recon are using it for, is started with the Toyota RAV4 in 2013. In 2014, they added the Highlander. And then after that, they've been adding vehicles kind of ever since. There is a list of those, which we'll put up on the screen, and you'll be able to see the current list of what we have that's covered. The bulk of the vehicles that Toyota makes are now covered.
Well, looky here. The LX570 has been supported by this software since 2015. And this particular version of the software supports all models from 2016. So where's the date, Trooper Paul?
But it's a matter of which model years started coverage when. So it was RAV4s, Highlanders, I believe Camrys were next, and then there's another variety. Now, pretty much the bulk of Toyota and Lexus vehicles as well are covered for new models, but you'd have to look at the list to see if the one you're specifically looking at has the ability or not.
All right, and with Bosch CDR, the EDR data coverage goes back to kind of early 2000 model years.
By Bosch, he's referring to this tool here and its associated software. It's world-renowned imaging technology for taking snapshots of the EDR, which again is a different chip to the vehicle control history. A different chip that is commonly known to not have a date stamp.
You wouldn't expect to be able to get anything prior to when you couldn't get EDR crash data from the Bosch tool, anything prior to that as far as coverage goes. You're not aware of anything going that far back as far as TechStream coverage?
No, 2013 is as far back. Granted, there may be stuff in the TechStream. You can get code, engine codes, things like that, if that sort of thing is useful for your particular case. But as far as the vehicle control history, which is, the triggered data that Toyota is collecting, 2013 RAV4 is the first vehicle that had that for Toyotas.
Okay, great. Using TechStream, we often get asked with all the EDR tools and whatnot, the report that you get, and that how is the TechStream data using TechStream software? How is the information saved? Do you get a report, or do you have to do screenshots? How do you save the information that you retrieve using this equipment?
Well, when you actually go in to do the image, the vehicle control history image, if you do it in the native, I mean, you're obviously going to pull it in the native or the software in its native format. It's very user-friendly at that point because you can go through and look at individual events. You can see a variety of information that way. So that's the way you'll have to collect it, is using the TechStream software. At least at this point, I haven't heard of anybody doing anything else or using anything else.
Well, that's weird because we have, namely Trooper Paul and Trooper Guarino.
Once you've collected it in that software, you can export it into a CSV file and look at it in Excel. The CSV file is a little bit more clunky just because it's just the raw data. But you can, if you want to do analysis or something like that, and that's what you're more comfortable with, that is a possibility, or if you need to pass the data along to somebody else. But you can definitely save it in its native format, and you can actually come back and reopen that file in the Toyota software if you have a license for the software. And that's the way I would prefer to view it, just because, as I said, it's a lot more user-friendly the way they've got it set up. But you can certainly look at it either way.
Okay, and like questions we also get with EDR data, can the TechStream software, using that, can you alter or manipulate or change what you call a native, the raw data? Can you make any changes to that using the software?
No.
Oh, so if you don't export it to CSV and then import it into Excel, and you just keep it in the software, then it's verifiable for court?
No, you can't. And the other thing to keep in mind is that data, we have no ability to erase that data from the airbag control module either. That data, once it's stored in there, the only way it goes away is if it's overwritten by a newer event. Depending on the format, they overwrite eventually, but it stores so many of each event type, and then it will eventually start overwriting the older ones. But so we have no ability to change that.
Unless you pulled it clean off the motherboard and damaged it, right?
Obviously, if you export it into a CSV, you could certainly edit that, but the actual raw data that you would get in the TechStream format, I haven't heard of or seen of any way to change that, or to change what's in the airbag control module either.
And so does TechStream have access to the event data recorder, the crash data that you get with the Bosch tool? Basically, could you create a comparable report using TechStream to the CDR report with crash data?
The short answer is no. You can't actually get the data that's recorded by the EDR or the traditional data that we get with the Bosch tool or with the Bosch software. TechStream does not collect that.
Just to be clear, the EDR module is the old way of doing it, and the vehicle control history is the new way of doing it. And because we're in this transition stage as far as the laws go, the federal laws that apply to the vehicle manufacturer industry, both chips need to be on board until such time as everybody has moved over to the new system.
Now, I would assume that you can get the data through the DLC or the OBD port. Is the connection relatively the same? And are the principles the same as doing a Bosch CDR download? The car has to be powered up. The electrical system has to be intact to do a DLC download using TechStream. Is that all pretty much the same?
It's all the same. Yeah, you have to be able to turn the key on, power the car up, so the ignition runs, so that the bus, the CAN bus, will actually be active, because that's how the system communicates. But yes, it's similar to if you could do a DLC download for EDR, you can do a DLC image of the TechStream as well.
Okay, so once you've selected your interface and you're in the software, and that, how do you get the data that you're looking for with the TechStream software?
Actually, once you get connected to the car, so you'll plug in, turn the key on, just like you would for an EDR download. The software will connect through, if you have the right interface selected, will connect to the car. It'll populate the VIN. There'll be a few other things that you'll have to choose from just pull-down menus, like if it's got a smart key, maybe some trim codes or whatever like that. But all of that should be relatively simple. Once you do that, it will pull up a screen that shows all of the modules that the vehicle might have in yellow. And because it doesn't try to establish communication with them until you tell it to. Once you've done that, you'll click on the SRS, the Supplemental Restraint System module. You click on that module. That'll open up another screen, and the first thing it'll do is it'll give you if there's codes, right? So it'll flash up all the codes that are for the airbag system. And then on the left side of the screen, there'll be a radio button that says Utility. And so you'll click on that Utility button, and that will open up another screen. And in that screen, you'll actually see a list of multiple things that you can choose on the right-hand side of the screen. One of those will be vehicle control history. So you'll click on that, and then you'll go down to the bottom of the screen, and there's an arrow. Click on the arrow. It's on the right-hand side of the bottom of the screen. Click on that arrow, and then it will say it'll go to the next screen, and then basically what it'll do is it'll calculate how long it's going to take for you to download that control history. It'll give you some amount of time for that to happen. And then once you get it started, it'll just go, and it'll collect that data. The last one I did was about 10 minutes. I've had them as long as 20. Typically, it doesn't take as long as it says it's going to take, but it can. And I think the longest I've waited is about 16 or 17 minutes for it to download everything. Once it does that, it will just pop up the screen that's got all the events stored there, and show you a list of all those events. And then you can look at the events individually in the software. You should absolutely save it as soon as you do that. So there's a save button up on the top of the screen. Go to that save button, click on it so it saves it immediately. It will give you the option when you click on it to save it in its native format, which is a TSE file.
So if the file extension doesn't read .tse, then it's not a verifiable native file.
Or you can export it in a CSV file. Typically, I'll do both right away and put it in a place where you can find it, because the software kind of buries it in one of its own directories. So save both of those things in that format, in both formats. And then if you want to, like I said, you can view it in the Toyota software. You can view it in an Excel, however you want to do that. And then when you go to close out of there, it will actually ask you if you want to save it again. And I always just save it in the native directory. So now I've got 2 copies. Both of the one that I first initially saved, and then the one that saves automatically when you close out. And you can go back in, even after you're disconnected from the car, with the Toyota software and reopen that file and view it in the Toyota software anytime, as long as you've saved it.
So if you create a CSV copy and you want to put that in Excel, you would verify it by having the original .tse file with your Excel file. And then you would hand both of those files over to Defence in a timely manner during discovery so they can check it before it gets entered into evidence. You see how this works now, Trooper Paul?
Okay, so what causes the data to be saved into the system in the vehicle?
Well, basically, Toyota's got a variety of what they call triggers that will trigger an event to be stored. And so it's very similar to EDR in the respect that it will give you information prior to the trigger and after the trigger, right? So it's continuously recording. When the trigger occurs, it snapshots what happened before, and it gives you some time after. There's various things. There's an example on the screen of what the triggers look like, so what it's seeing, what the sampling cycles are, things like that. And then the next example that you'll see on the screen is a list of some of the triggers and the amount of data that's recorded before and after, and then also how many points of data are recorded, because it changes the frequency of the recording depending on the event. So not every single one is the same. So one of the triggers, for instance, is accelerator high position in mid to high speed, right? So basically you're traveling along 40 to 50 miles an hour and you dynamite the gas or dynamite the accelerator, and that potentially will store an event. Traction control, vehicle slip control, ABS, sudden braking, all these things are things that will trigger an event. But the important thing to remember is that just because it's called a trigger, it's very specific what the trigger is. And it's not the same trigger that EDR refers to as algorithm enable, right? It's a separate system, and it's actually recording it based on that trigger. So just because you have data that corresponds to your event, the trigger is not going to be event trigger that triggered that stored the EDR data.
In plain English, he's saying that the older module stores different trigger types to what the newer module does, inferring that the newer module is far more specific to the make and model of the car and its individual features, whereas the older module wasn't so specific. It fitted thousands of cars with only similar features.
It could be close, it could be nowhere near it. But you have to keep that in mind when you're trying to use this data for analysis, that it's going to be a completely different time that it was triggered. And so you can't look at this and say, well, the trigger means that it matches the EDR, because it may or may not.
So there's all kinds of things that are going on in the vehicle that can trigger these systems to record data. What type of information is recorded other than the typical standard EDR crash data?
Well, again, you'll see up on the screen, there's a variety of things that it records. The things that we're most interested in are things like throttle position, vehicle speed, brake pressure. You'll actually get lateral and longitudinal Gs from those accelerometers.
Wait a minute, there's an accelerometer in our cars, just like there's an accelerometer in our phones, and it's forensically reliable data? That's not what Trooper Garino said.
You can get whether the cruise is off or on. You could get steering, what actually caused the trigger, right? So you'll know if it was an ABS or what it was. You'll get brake pressure, which will tell you how far the person is into the brake. So there's a lot of really good information that gets stored. It's just a matter of what stores it. And then also in the image on the screen, you can see that each trigger is given an ID number, so those ID numbers are laid out.
Typically, you would use the ID number for whichever triggering event you are interested in to search through other data modules, like, I don't know, maybe the infotainment system, and match the ID with a row which might have, I don't know, like GPS data. But gee, what would I know? I only program databases for a living.
As far as vehicle speed, which triggers will give you speed, because not every trigger will give you the same information. But a lot of times, for instance, in a crash situation, a lot of times the trigger that I'm interested in will be a sudden braking, or a vehicle slip control, or a collision avoidance system that activates. And when that system activated, you'll actually see information, so it should store this information. And you know if that system activated, it's doing collision avoidance. And again, to reiterate, that trigger that triggered the collision avoidance could be happen at a different point in time than algorithm enable.
Oh, so timestamps are pretty important data points then. Did you hear that, Trooper Paul?
And it most likely did, because the avoidance hopefully is before the crash. But there's good information that it can tell you about what was going on prior to the crash, even prior to the 5 seconds before that we get from EDR.
All right, so you mentioned all these different triggers that trigger all this different information being collected that may or may not be related to the event as stored in the event data recorder. How are you able to differentiate when that trigger occurred in a relationship to an event?
There's a few different ways. If the vehicle is equipped with a navigation system, you will have a time and date stamp for when the particular trigger occurred. So if you know the time and date of your crash, that makes it relatively simple. If you do not have a navigation system, unfortunately, you will not have that time and date stamp.
Huh. So if the EDR, which doesn't have a timestamp, doesn't match the vehicle control history, which does have a timestamp, then you can always refer to the ID number in the infotainment system that matches the EDR event to compare if they are the same event or not. Unless, of course, you accidentally on purposely lose the date column or accidentally on purposely destroy the infotainment system, for example.
And the other important thing is that you may have ignition cycles But these vehicles have more than one cycle counter, and so the cycle counts in your data may not match the cycle counts in your EDR data. And that doesn't mean that it's not related, it just means that there's two different cycle counters.
One key cycle counter based on the old technology, and the other key cycle counter based on the new technology.
So what you would need to do at that point is you need to look at things like the vehicle speed and look at what type of event. And if you know
using the ID that we were just talking about,
the person, for instance, hit the brakes right before the crash or swerved, then you can potentially relate that. The other thing is if the vehicle's totaled, you'll know that what's going to be one of the last events. If there's an event that's related, it's going to be one of the last events that's stored. Also, many times you could get mileage, and so if you have mileage on the vehicle, you also may be able to correlate that.
He did say also multiple times there, meaning all of these other data points he's mentioned. Also, the mileage could help. Also, other data, which is vastly different to what Trooper Paul said. He basically said, no, I only needed the mileage, that's all. No need for timestamps or matching IDs in other modules.
To your crash. So there's multiple things that you potentially could do. The big thing is that the data should match the circumstances of the crash, right? I mean, that's what this is just another tool. And if you can coordinate this from speeds or from something to say it's related to your crash, then definitely use it. If you absolutely can't tell for sure because you just don't have the information, then I would say it's possible that it's related, but it may or may not be. So it's just a matter of that's where the analyst part of this comes in, right? You have to use this as an analysis tool and see if you can correlate this somehow to the circumstances of your crash.
So, Trooper Paul, where is the cotton pickin' tarnation bloomin' timestamp, mate? Or better still, where's the native.cotton pickin' tarnation bloomin' TSC file so the defence can check your work, mate? And don't you worry, Trooper Guarino, I'm coming after you next. I got a whole other OBD2 chip to pick with you, mate.